What is up? What is up? Happy Friday, crypto enthusiasts. Happy Friday to you all. Hopefully you guys are surviving this week. Essentially seeing roughly a 91% retracement on ETH. That's really what's happening right now. I think the question that a lot of us are asking is, how much are we going to be dipping into Friday going into the weekend? Keeping in mind, weekends have been, at least for the last 60 days, have been notorious for a lot of movement. So we're going to be discussing some of that today, taking a look at USDT, looking at some levels that I'm going to be hawking, if you will, that we need to actually be holding. That being said, let's kind of dive into these charts. Let's look at daily. Let's kind of start here on the higher time frames. So this move right here, this entire pump that we had, we just retraced 91% of that. That's what I was alluding to. It could go a little bit deeper, to be quite honest with you. It could come down to these lower handles right over here where we have, obviously there's some support that was built over here. But if I'm looking left and I'm kind of gauging this looking left, this was kind of like a rodeo area. What I mean by that is like price action was just kind of coiling over this area, almost like a snake on a branch, if you will. And, support, resistance. And then we had our last resistance right here. We pushed down and then we pushed up through it. We had a couple retests and now we can see that we're retesting that area again. We do have a change of character on the daily as well. It's not giving that too much hope, but just going to put a little bit of hopium into the market. When we have those change of characters, we typically do see a pullback. Something that looks like this right over here. We had a change of character to the upside, we had a deep retracement, then we got our breaker structures, and then we started breaking down to the downside. We got our change of character here to the downside, and then we got our breaker structure here to the downside, now with a new change of character. It's not uncommon for it to kind of like flip-flop between the two, but we did see that when we were starting to get into frothy areas, and this was around the all-time high area. Change of character, change of character, change of character, change of character. Then it finally broke and came down to the downside. Could we see something that's very similar to that? I don't know. I'm leaning more towards this is a pullback before we see continuation up to the upside. But then again, it is Friday, like I had mentioned before. So it's really contingent on what the weekend is going to bring for us. We do have some lower time frame ideas. I'll be peeking at those here in a minute. I do want to take note of USDT, kind of where it's at right now. Just from a sequential count here on the 4 hour. We have volatility that's seeping in here on the DMI, and we can see that it did print a nice 9 here in this area with an exhaustion candle. We had something very similar over here when we were measuring what would be a potential wave B. I don't know if this is going to be the wave C. I have lower targets just from a fib level perspective. This doesn't really line up with too much for a wave C. I can put the measurements on there and say, okay, well, maybe that was, but with my bias, at least what I'm looking at, I think it has a little bit lower to come to. I'm actually looking at, let's go to a daily on USDT. We didn't even really touch any flat levels. We came to this 0.236, but we clearly violated it, and we came back up to it just now. That's kind of what we're seeing. Again, same thing on the daily. We have some volatility that's appearing here. So I'm looking at these lower targets for USDT that would warrant the move for ETH to move up to the upside. Now I want to flip down to, let's say, like a 4 hour here on ETH. Looking at a potential bat pattern that could be forming. It's actually probably viewed a little bit better here on a 1 hour. This is the way I have it structured as of right now. Looking at you know, 2005, if 2005 can get reclaimed, you know, today or maybe by tomorrow or anything like that, then this pattern, the probabilities of this pattern come more into fruition. Now, I have seen where a pattern can come into a potential confirmation area, hit as resistance, and start breaking down. So from a psychological level, you know, that 2000 mark is pretty important on both sides. You know, bears don't want to give it up, and bulls are doing everything in their life to defend that area. So, you know, that's the reasoning behind why this 2005 level makes sense to me. If I can show you on lower time frames as well too, you know, we had this little break right over here. We can look at a TD9 sequential. I believe I was on a 15. No, I was on a 34. And we can look at the count here. We can actually see that we're pretty cooled down from a heat map perspective. We did print a 9 here, but the 9 had a failure. Let's double check that real quick because I just came across that now. Actually, no, the 8 is lower by just a smidge. That 8 is lower. So that could warrant why this would start to move up if that account is legit. From a lead up phase perspective, we did print a 13, excuse me, over here inside of these zones. So that's kind of pointing towards that this trend is running into its limits, into its exhaustion areas, coupled with a breaker structure as well to the downside. Now that feeds into the 4 hour that I was just mentioning, excuse me, not the 4 hour, the daily that I was just mentioning to you, saying, okay, well, we do have a change of character here. We are printing a 1 on the daily. Yes, we are. But let's go 4 back. Let's just make the assumption. Let's go into the next day and let's go 4 back. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the target essentially that we need to close above by tomorrow. So I would strongly see that we would retest that area. So 2005 may get tapped into, move a little bit higher into 2026, and then it starts retracing all the way back down. The key area on the 4 hour when it comes to that 2005 area is it needs to be reclaimed on a 4 hour. That's really what I'm looking for it to hold that area. Sure, maybe a 34 minute or a 15 minute or what have you gets to those levels, and maybe it reclaims on those lower time frames, but the higher time frame 4 hour is going to be the trigger for me as far as what I'm looking at. It looks like I'm dropping frames on my side, so if I am lagging out, we'll give it a minute. Sometimes that thing stabilizes on its own, but if it doesn't stabilize for whatever reason, you guys know, I'll just restart the stream for us. Currently just building some positions at the 1974. This is something that we had mentioned inside the server earlier this morning. We did have some targets that were stopped out. I was looking at 1998 inside of that zone, but clearly we got stopped out, which is part of the game. Really, at the end of the day, it's part of the game. So we're really looking at, this was the setup that we had this morning. We're looking at 1998, 1972 being a stop loss. We came literally to stop loss areas and then started finding some support inside that zone. One might say, were you targeted? I don't know. Maybe I was aligning myself with retail. That's very, very possible, seeing the same thing that everyone else is seeing. I was looking at a potential falling wedge